In this video series, I will provide perspective, historical fact, and critical analyses of the current political landscape that gave cause for the resurgence of the American government, as we are taking the needed steps to restore our lawful government here in America. I will present to you how it is being done. The Federation of States has secured and offers to you your rightful claim to your inheritance as an American. And we ask that you join your fellow American state nationals in the work of finishing the reconstruction of our constitutionally guaranteed Republican form of government. Welcome back, America and the world, to today's episode of the Resurgence Post Report. I am your host, Louise Campbell Anthony, here with the Peacekeeping Task Force for the Federation of States, that is, the United States of America Unincorporated. We're going to take an honest look at the real predicament of our financial economy. And it's not all grim, but I'm going to give you the grim side of it first in today's episode. But you'll have to stay tuned for the better side on the next episode. Our world of finance is so convoluted, it's too much information to analyze in one episode. So I broke it up. In part one, I'm going to present 13 facts that underlines why our American government maintains that this current financial apparatus we live under from day to day must no longer be tolerated. If we are to be a free and sovereign people, in fact, it must be dismantled and replaced. This part I will cover in part two. Now, to begin with this episode, let me introduce to you the perspective for part one. Watch this short video clip and listen to a precise description of our financial predicament, not only here in America, but across the world.
For the EFT, Mr. Bloom has 2 minutes.
Commissioner, Mr. President, I rise again, I'm afraid, to make the same old hoary speech that I've been making here for several years, and that is, it is my opinion that you do not really understand the concept of banking. All the banks are broke. Bank Santander, Deutsche Bank, Royal Bank of Scotland, they're all broke. And why are they broke? It isn't an act of God. It isn't some sort of tsunami. They're broke because we have a system called fractional reserve banking, which means that banks can lend money that they don't actually have. It's a criminal scandal, and it's been going on for too long. To add to that problem, you have moral hazard, a very significant moral hazard from the political sphere. And most of the problem starts in politics and central banks, which are part of the same political system. We have counterfeiting, sometimes called quantitative easing, but counterfeiting by any other name. The artificial printing of money, which if any ordinary person did, they'd go to prison for a very long time. And yet governments and central banks do it all the time. Central banks repress the amount of interest that rates are, so we don't have the real cost of money. And yet we blame the real retail banks for manipulating LIBOR. The sheer effrontery of this is quite astonishing. It's central banks that manipulate interest rates, Commissioner. And plus, underneath all this, we talk loosely, in a rather cavalier fashion, do we not, about deposit guarantees. So when banks go broke through their own incompetence and chicanery, the taxpayer picks up the tab. It's theft from the taxpayer. And until we start sending bankers, and I include central bankers and politicians, to prison for this outrage, it will continue.
There's a ruse going on all across this planet, not only by commercial banks, but by every commercial corporation incorporated to do business anywhere. Just like the United States, Inc., all capital letters, is a private commercial franchise, so are the banks like Wells Fargo, Deutsche Bank, HSBC, and Barclays. These commercial banks have no money to lend you. They own no assets, and they never have. All the assets on this planet, the land itself, the gold, the silver, our labor that we exchange with them, they belong to us, the living people. The credit that the banks claim to loan to you is actually yours, not theirs. The value of your labor you performed at your jobs has been extracted from you, and the corporations never paid you for it. Our sovereignty as living men and women and our sovereignty as a nation are inextricably connected to the assets we own. If your assets can be commandeered, your sovereignty can be stripped away. That is what has happened all across this planet. For this reason alone, we need a fiduciary to protect and keep an account of our assets. The good news is our nation and the world now have one, but that's for the next episode. So first, let's come to terms with the grim aspects of our financial world today. Does everybody remember the story about Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz? Dorothy was taken up in a cyclone from her home in Kansas to a world of make-believe called the Land of Oz. This story was written at the time of the 1907 bankruptcy of the very first version of the British Territorial United States of America, Incorporated. Remember the government franchise corporation that was chartered in 1868 by our federal British territorial president, Abraham Lincoln? This story really was about the disclosure of the Federal Reserve scheme that was developing in the background. It was cloaked in an innocent children's novel. The author, Frank L. Baum, somehow already knew what was up. Look at the characters in The Wizard of Oz. You have a straw man, the scarecrow. That represents a corporation. And a tin man, a tax ID number, TIN, for that corporation. Then you have the cowardly lion, representing the cowards behind the corporate veil, running these corporations. And there is Oz, O-Z, the abbreviation for ounce. In the book, Dorothy's shoes were silver, not ruby. So you click your little silver slippers, as in an ounce of silver, to get back home to the real world. What was happening in the background on a remote location in Georgia at the elite Jekyll Island Club on November 10th, 1910, 6 cowardly lions met. 3 powerful bankers, a Treasury official, a congressman, and his secretary, to cook up plans for a new central banking system that came into fruition in 1913 with the passing of the Federal Reserve Act. Their plan was to trade our silver dollar for fiat paper currency, a Federal Reserve note, a literal IOU. The Federal Reserve note is not an American dollar, despite pretensions and illusions otherwise. An American dollar is made of silver. Silver is actual money. The British Territorial Congress guaranteed us 1 ounce of silver for every fiat dollar the Federal Reserve prints, which would be trillions of ounces of silver that they knew they could never provide. Ultimately, like all fiat currencies before it, the Federal Reserve note was doomed to fail from birth. And this was not unexpected. The bankers meeting on Jekyll Island back in 1910 all knew what to expect, and they planned to profit from it. Now, who in their right mind would make a business deal like that? No one, unless it's a backdoor dirty deal. And that is exactly what it was. The most obvious profit to be made in their scheme is by exchanging a piece of paper promising future repayment at an uncertain and an undeclared future time for actual goods and services. And of course, promoting this in equitable exchange under force of legal tender laws and color of law. The plan launched on Jekyll Island was the ultimate something for nothing scam. We've been living in this land of Oz so long, we don't even know what actual money looks like. That Federal Reserve note you carry in your pocket right now only carry the illusion of being money. Let's get into those 13 facts that discloses what this backdoor dirty deal delivered. Fact number 1. Federal Reserve notes are not actual money. They are blood money. Prior to the formation of the Federal Reserve, money in circulation consisted of copper, silver, and gold coins, United States notes, silver certificates, and gold certificates. All of these were non-interest bearing, were issued directly by the U.S. Treasury, and did not have any debt associated with their issuance. To be actual money, it has to have value in and of itself. A gold coin has value in and of itself because gold has value apart from whatever form it takes. Let me put up a picture comparison here for you to see, and some of you for the first time, what actual money really looks like. Here are images of actual money, silver certificates and silver coins. Silver was decidedly our domestic currency that we traded among ourselves, and gold was our global international currency that we traded abroad. To see what qualifies as actual money, let's examine this paper closer on its face. It identifies as a silver certificate, and it certifies that $1 of silver exists at the U.S. Treasury, and it will be given to the holder of the certificate by the Treasury Department when you bring it in and you exchange it. It says $1 of silver payable to the bearer on demand. And it's signed by the Treasurer of the United States and the Secretary of the Treasury. It says that this certificate is legal tender for all debts, public and private. It's the 1935 E-Series. And on the back, it simply says $1. We have 1 ounce of silver, $1, 50-cent piece. Any of you remember that? That was our half dollar. We have the $quarter, which is the 25 cents piece, and we have the dime, the 10 cents. All 4 coins are made predominantly of silver. These elements on the face of our money are what gave the American people confidence in the value of our currency back then. Everything else that passes for money today is not money at all, but actual commercial script. Some form of bill, credit certificate, promissory note, warehouse receipt, bill of lading, etc. All are commercial paper. They have no value in and of itself, making them not money, but fiat currency. Now let's examine today's fiat currency. These are not money. This is fiat paper, IOUs, Federal Reserve notes, and copper coins. Let's look at them a little bit closer. It identifies as a Federal Reserve note. This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. The same officers of the U.S. Treasury signed it, but that's it, nothing more. And on the back, it also says $1, but there's an additional note here. It also says, "In God we trust." That line was added in 1934. Do you know what happened in 1934? You'll know by the time this episode is over. No Federal Reserve note in history has had a firm repayment date published on the face of it. So these promissory notes are fraudulent on its face. The Federal Reserve note, FRN, has always been a fiat currency, meaning having no value in and of itself, just paper. You are told in this land of Oz that it represents the amount of debt that our country and people supposedly owes to the Federal Reserve for the favor of printing debt-based currency for our federal subcontractors, the British Territorial United States of America Incorporated. What you are not told is that these currencies are backed by the value of labor, services, patents, trademarks, and other intellectual property. We call them blood money because they derive their value from the attributes of living people, from our energy, our skills, our labor, our inventions, our performances, our talents, etc. Our fiduciary wrote a whole book about this blood money. I will leave a link to it in the description below. I recommend that everybody get you a copy and read it. The Federal Reserve note is in reality a private military script issued by the British Territorial United States and should have just remained a domestic currency and never used as an international currency at all. The U.S. military has been forcing us to use their military script as part of a coercive domestic currency monopoly scheme since 1913, because they, in their territorial capacity, set up a central bank calling itself the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve note is backed by the labor of slaves and peons. It is blood money. And both slavery and peonage have been outlawed worldwide since 1926. That is just one of the problems attached to the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve note. Fact number 2. A fiat economy is a Ponzi scheme. Let me define what a Ponzi scheme is. A Ponzi scheme is an investment fraud where early investors are paid with money from later investors, creating the illusion of high profits from a legitimate business that often doesn't exist. These schemes inevitably collapse when new money dries up or too many investors cash out, causing massive losses for most participants as who created it in the first place to profit from. Many of you think or assume that Federal Reserve notes are constantly being printed on demand on printing presses when you get loans from the banks. But no, money of account is what drives and supplies the economy in a fiat system, which is all predicated and run on the basis of consumer credit and commercial debt instruments in the form of so-called ledger loans made to consumers. This fiat system depends on banks making new loans, lots of new loans, to inject the illusion of money into the economy. I call it an illusion because ledger loans, quote unquote, are just digits placed on the bank's ledger with no regard to any actual Federal Reserve note being on deposit or printed that certifies the money actually exists. Let me translate that. No physical dollars are printed or acquired from anywhere to cover this loan. This is what is meant by money of account. It isn't actual money they give you. It's really a ledger entry by the banker who tags it as money that you are borrowing from yourself. This enables the banker now to wave his magic wand and create a credit for themselves to use that can be up to 10 times the amount that you are borrowing from yourself. This is allowed in our current fiat system by the practice called fractional reserve banking that the man talked about in our opening video. Fractional reserve banking allows the banks to loan out 7 to 10 times the amount of your loan amount to other people. So one person isn't enough to secure such a loan, mainly because your loan that netted you $100,000 resulted in the bank ledgering $1 million in new credit while you didn't ask for that amount. Thus, your loan stands as guarantee to 7 to 10 other loans guaranteed by other people who are also borrowing credit from themselves. This guarantee function of your loan is never disclosed to you, and you are never rewarded nor profited for being the guarantor. It's essentially credit that you loan yourself, and the only one responsible is you. That's why yours is the only signature ever appearing on any of these titles or bank loans and so on. The banks have all been insolvent since the 1930s. They are prohibited by law from loaning their own money or any depositor's money. So you see, it's a shell game by definition. These facts are never disclosed to you, and you are left to assume that a traditional bank model exists when it doesn't. All goes well, so as long as there are people lined up to make new loans to themselves and also paying those loans off again to themselves along with the others. Do you see now how it's a Ponzi scheme at work? Fact number 3. The U.S. Army and the Federal Reserve colluded to steal American assets as collateral. The Union Army under the British territorial President Abraham Lincoln began doing business on its own and borrowed money from the Federal Reserve beginning in 1863 up through 1913. at which time their Scottish chartered corporation collapsed in bankruptcy. There's a reason that World War I started in 1913 and the Federal Reserve Act passed in 1913 under Woodrow Wilson. The Federal Reserve was a consortium of mostly foreign private banks that existed long prior to the mercenary conflict, aka American Civil War. It merely came back into the forefront when Lincoln needed money to front the business activities of their newly chartered Scottish corporation, which they named the United States of America Incorporated. They operated it under a look-alike constitution, which they called the Constitution of the United States of America, published it in 1868. This was not our constitution that we established with them in 1789, but merely it's the Scottish corporation's bylaws as their articles of incorporation, deceptively named a constitution. By the time the mercenary conflict, aka American Civil War, actually happened, the Federal Reserve was a freestanding player in its own right that was affording the government with loaning money to the government. That's how Lincoln wound up working for the Federal Reserve and how they got involved in the whole blood money trade, which is a trade on our energy and work performances, because that's what they could actually access under the terms of the original Constitution of 1789. Operating as the United States of America Incorporated, a Scottish chartered commercial corporation, they gained access to our credit and assets. They transported our gold and silver offshore, purportedly for safekeeping, quote unquote, prior to bankrupting this corporation in 1906-07. They also used our money to buy large land acquisitions, including Alaska, Hawaii, the Philippine Islands, and more. In 1870, they began chartering corporations for us, quote unquote, and in our names. The Federal Reserve was willing to continue loaning the British territorial U.S. government money based on their claims to own and control our assets, even though it was an illegal occupation of our country by men and women who owed us and still owe us good faith service. But the Fed wanted a monopoly in return. The Federal Reserve Act just formalized a pre-existing corrupt relationship and protected the Federal Reserve monopoly. The act allowed for the federal United States to hypothecate, which means to pledge something as a security without taking possession of it. Hypothecate all the present and future properties, assets, and labor of their subjects, the 14th Amendment U.S. citizen, to the Federal Reserve System. All property within the federal United States was pledged to the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve, in which the trustees as stockholders held legal title. The U.S. citizen, as a tenant and franchisee, was registered as a beneficiary of the trust property via his or her birth certificate, as dictated by their 14th Amendment bylaw. Like any other debtor, the federal United States government had to assign collateral and security to their creditors as a condition of the loan. Since it didn't have any assets to loan, they assigned the private property of their economic slaves, the U.S. citizens, as collateral against the unpayable federal debt. They also pledged the unincorporated federal territories, national parks, forests, birth certificates, and nonprofit organizations as collateral against the federal debt. All of these assets have already been transferred as payment to the international bankers. In return, the Federal Reserve System agreed to loan the Federal United States Corporation all the credit money substitute, that is, Federal Reserve notes, it needed. So you see, there's a special relationship between the U.S. Army and the Federal Reserve that goes back a long way. It's not new. It's the same old repeat cycle on autopilot. It's the same public-private relationship we see in government today. The commercial interests pay the government pays the military works to protect the government and the commercial interests. They couldn't have made it this far without assisting each other and providing mutual flakjackets along the way. But when the chips are really down, as they are now, who can the military throw under the bus and blame? Fact number 4, a debt credit system was promised but never implemented. Our self-appointed trustees under President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, passed the Emergency Banking Act in 1934. 1934, remember that? Establishing the Federal Reserve note exchange rate with the then silver United States dollar on a one-to-one basis. In this way, the perpetrators were enabled to collect silver in exchange for paper IOUs. It was an inequitable exchange under duress and executed under color of law and under the false pretense of a military occupation, which was nothing but an illegal mercenary occupation the entire time. Every time a Federal Reserve note, an IOU, is presented, an equal amount of actual goods and services is extracted from the economy. What should have happened upon the enactment of what was called the Bretton Woods Agreement is that a means should have been provided to cancel the IOU and immediately retire it from circulation the moment that an equivalent amount of goods and services was received. This was not done, and the intended and publicized zero-sum transaction economy of the Bretton Woods Agreement was never fully implemented. This racked up an odious national debt, whereas today it sits at $38.43 trillion. Our fiduciary for the United States of America Unincorporated, Judge Anna, delivered this message to President Trump and the American people addressing this national debt. Listen.
Good morning, campers. Judge Anna here. It's October 10th, 2018. This is a message for Donald Trump and the American people. Mr. President, I saw your August 27th video about the national debt, in which you called it a fake debt and described the need to default on it. And I knew right then that I had to do this video. There are a few things I need to explain. The debt is real. It's the accounting that's false. It's the missing national credit that's at issue. Now, in a debt credit system, we all know that when a debt is created, so is a credit. There's no way to actually accrue debt in a debt credit system. But if you think about this in a slightly different way, you understand how IOUs work too. When a person gives you an IOU in exchange for goods or services, that person accrues a debt to you. Why? Because you weren't actually paid anything of value in exchange for your goods and services. As a result, the debt is real. That's what we've been doing for over 100 years in this country. We've been accepting IOUs from the Federal Reserve as if it were actual money and actual payment when it's not. So there's a debt on their side of the ledger, and there's a credit in behalf of the actual American states and people who contributed real assets and real services to the exchange. So you can see that the national debt is real, and you can see that it is owed to the American states and people, and we are your priority creditors. There's absolutely no doubt about that. However, in a debt credit system, a debt can't accrue. So where is the missing national credit? It hasn't been applied to the debt. Well, here's the anti-intuitive part of it. The national debt is actually a debt that we owe to ourselves. Now, on the credit side of the ledger, we're unimaginably wealthy. We can pay off the national debt and not even blink. That's not a problem. Or, since it's a debt that we owe ourselves, we can forgive it. There's nobody to complain otherwise. We can just say, well, we forgive ourselves, and it's over. You, Donald Trump, are holding the debt side of an account ledger, while I am holding the credit side of the same account ledger. What needs to happen is for us to get together and reconcile the books. So let's do it. There's no need for any controversy or default or drama. It can simply be taken care of, and you can get on with making America great again, which frankly, we would all love to see. So let's do it. The sooner the better.
Did Mr. Trump and the White Hats take our fiduciary up on this offer? No. Instead, Donald J. Trump presented the International Court of Justice with a 4,500-page document attempting to justify the adoption of a new currency called the United States note as the world's reserve currency. This will replace the fraudulent Federal Reserve note, but be no less fraudulent. While we are faced with the degraded and counterfeited and inflated status of the Federal Reserve note, he suggests that we replace one debt-based note system with another, just start over, without recognizing or attempting to deal with the criminal nature of the debt-based currency systems and their impact on life on this planet. We maintain that a gigantic amount of prepaid credit already exists and stands in favor of the living people of this planet. We simply convert debt to prepaid credit and use familiar means to access it. There is no need to promise to pay anything. It has already been paid for. This debt is owed to the living people by the corporations, and it must be honored. Mr. Trump, however, had promised to give each household, regardless of the number of persons in each household, a lump sum payoff of $1.1 million in Federal Reserve notes, more IOUs, in settlement of the national debt, and call this maneuver Jassara. This is not Jassara and not a Jubilee either. This is another something-for-nothing commercial fraud scheme. Fact number 5. The Federal Reserve is a private banking cartel, not part of the federal government. You've heard the saying, follow the money, right? Have you also heard the quote, let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws? That's a quote from Mayor Amschel Rothschild. Whomever is in control of the money is literally in control of your country. There is a linear connection between the Rothschilds and the Bank of England and the London banking houses, which ultimately control the Federal Reserve banks through their stock holdings of bank stock in their subsidiary firms in New York. The two principal Rothschild representatives in New York, J.P. Morgan Company and Kuhn, Loeb and Company, were the firms which set up the Jekyll Island Conference at which the Federal Reserve Act was drafted, who directed the subsequent successful campaign to have the plan enacted as a bylaw to their constitution by the Territorial Congress, and who purchased the controlling amounts of stock in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York in 1914. These firms had their principal officers appointed to the Federal Reserve Board of Governors and the Federal Advisory Council in 1914. In 1914, a few families, blood or business related, owning controlling stock in existing banks, such as in New York City, caused those banks to purchase controlling shares in the Federal Reserve regional banks. Upon examination of this linear connection and the text in the House Banking Committee staff report of August 1976, and the current stockholders list of the 12 regional Federal Reserve banks, it reveals the same family control. The Federal Reserve System was a sovereign power structure separate and distinct from the federal United States government. The Federal Reserve is a maritime lender and/or maritime insurance underwriter to the federal United States, operating exclusively under maritime law. The lender or underwriter bears the risks, and the maritime law compelling specific performance and paying the interest or premiums are the same. Assets of the debtor can also be hypothecated as security by the lender or underwriter. The Federal Reserve Act stipulated that the interest on the debt was to be paid in gold. There was no stipulation in the Federal Reserve Act for ever paying the principal. To this day, Federal Reserve notes, which have been given a private monopoly as the domestic currency of this country, are not negotiable instruments. They have no date for repayment of the loan and do not state any particular form of repayment. Again, I ask, who makes a business deal like this? As we have always observed, none of these evils visited on this country and its people would have been possible without the complicity of the central banks and in particular the Federal Reserve. If the Federal Reserve hadn't been willing to loan the U.S. Army money based on their claims against their employers, us, and our assets, the U.S. Army would have been forced to admit the circumstance and assist us in holding new public elections and reconstructing our lawful American government as it should have been. The Federal Reserve is what expedited the horse getting the bit in its teeth and careening down the road of 150 years of mercenary profiteering and war-for-profit activities at the expense of the American people and everyone else in the world. What you need to know is that the Federal Reserve shut down its trademarked Federal Reserve System and bankrupted it back in 2009, and they skipped town with the profits. They are long gone, leaving us with all their worthless script to make good. They paid nothing but the cost of printing Federal Reserve notes in exchange for purloining all that silver. And they did the same thing with the gold. And they did it on a worldwide basis. Whether we knew it or not, whether we agreed or not, we were imposed upon to loan, under force, our deposits to these private banking interests. And what did they do with this unearned, unlawfully importuned, unjust enrichment? They cashiered the gold, mostly in the Philippines, and invested the silver and other precious metals in the stock and commodity markets of the world. They created the Exchange Stabilization Fund. That's a giant currency commodity rigging fund with which they could control, expand, or collapse the supplies and values of any national currency. This then gave them coercive economic power and control over all the national economies and also over the governments of those countries. They also bought controlling positions in all the Fortune 500 companies and controlling positions in all the commodity markets in America. Once they had ownership of these companies and markets, all paid for initially using our purloined gold and silver, they began rolling printing presses, and every time that any of their corporations and their market shares threatened to tank, they simply bought up shares of their own corporations using funny money issued again against our assets. In fact, I'll present to you how they did this just 2 weeks ago. The primary beneficiaries of all this criminality are in this order of importance: the Pope, the Queen, or now the King, Jacob Rothschild, and several corporations, including Serco, the paymaster for the U.S. military. The Federal Reserve, this private banking cartel, not really part of our government at all, technically issues the Federal Reserve note under contract for the government services corporations who act as our federal subcontractors because they, according to their constitutions, have no ability to issue credit for themselves. That is, this system has been purposefully constructed by the banks and the foreign federal subcontractors to do an end run around the requirements imposed by the federal constitutions. They called themselves the Federal Reserve to make it sound like they were an official government institution. But no, in fact, the Federal Reserve was nothing but a private association of banks engaged in the process of seizing your silver at no cost to themselves, issuing IOUs, promises to pay you back at some later unspecified date, and promoting institutionalized fraud. By this unexplained, undisclosed process initiated by parties deliberately misrepresenting themselves as someone or something that was part of the federal government, vast quantities of silver deposited by Americans in banks throughout this country and other assets of ours deposited around the world were seized upon by the members of the so-called Federal Reserve System. Fact number 6. The Rockefellers' illegal SWIFT system monopoly controls the economies of the world. The current bank transfer system in the West was engineered by John D. Rockefeller. His sons updated it as the SWIFT system. It has been the means that banks transfer credits and debits for decades, and it is little more than a fancy fax system. J.D. Rockefeller is most famous as a 19th century robber baron and oil magnate, but unlike other oil boom millionaires, Rockefeller didn't actually produce any oil. He provided a pipeline transfer service to those who did. His company, Standard Oil, was soon picking up oil transport contracts and then shipping, or more to the point, not shipping, oil under the transfer agreements wherever Rockefeller wanted it to go or not go. This gave JD de facto control over the industry. By controlling the transport of oil, he controlled the supply of oil, and that meant he also controlled the price of oil, the availability of oil, and the fortunes of specific oil producers. He was the middleman who could facilitate the flow of oil or obstruct the flow of oil at will. Finally, fed up with the coercive tactics and monopoly practices and obstruction of trade created by Standard Oil, the company was sued and broken up after the Second World War. What most people don't yet realize is that Rockefeller did the same thing with the banking industry. The SWIFT system is the equivalent of Standard Oil. Just like what JD did with the flow of oil, his sons did with the flow of money. And they did it on a much bigger scale. JD Rockefeller's oil pipelines crisscrossed the entire nation, but his sons' money pipelines crisscrossed the entire planet, and with much more devastating effects on free trade and the entire world economy. It is not an accident that the members of the Rockefeller family took the profits and knowledge they gained from the wreck of the Standard Oil and reinvested it in the International Monetary Fund as shareholders and founders of the IMF. Nor is it coincidence that the IMF has functioned as the United States Treasury since 1924. More on that later. So when you read Treasury of the United States of America on that Federal Reserve note in your pocket, translate that to mean International Monetary Fund and picture J.D. Rockefeller. Using the excuse of national security, the Rockefellers could shut down any business enterprise simply by cutting off access to money and credit. Just like JD shut down oil producers and strangled oil supplies for fun and profit. The Rockefellers engineered the SWIFT system to perpetuate institutionalized theft. They do this by transferring or blocking the transfer of the off-ledger assets or the credit resulting from all this clandestine activity, while the members of the Congress claiming to represent you receive the proceeds owed to you and spend it or reinvest it for you in things like taking over countries, developing bioweapons, weaponizing language, censorship, running human trafficking operations worldwide, running huge self-interested propaganda campaigns like the $1 trillion get vaccinated BS, and the kickbacks to the media corporations, and so on and so forth. The guilty military that is actually responsible for standing by and letting all this happen, and which profited itself grossly in the process. They have developed the QFS, quantum financial system, in which keystrokes represent value, and the digits entered by these precious keystrokes accumulate in imaginary digital wallets as social credits you can spend. Of course, they get to control this system just as the Rockefellers have controlled the SWIFT system. And they get to snoop into all business and personal transactions, and they get to control how much social credit you receive and dictate where and when you can spend it. And generally, they propose to take over where the Rockefellers left off and impose this coercive new La La Land of Oz control grid. The only advantage, and it's a temporary advantage, is that it's ready to go and anyone can access its services from anywhere in the world. Can you trust it? No. Is it coercive? Yes. Are those in charge of it trustworthy? Well, only if you trust the CIA and the corrupt military brass in charge of this whole cluster since 1863. Fact number 7. The Federal Reserve System is no more. It's J.P. Morgan and Chase Bank's criminal enterprise now. I have already mentioned in Fact 5 that the Federal Reserve System, a trademark utility of the Federal Reserve, went bankrupt in 2009. This was, in a funny way, both the cause and the result of the 2008 financial debacle. The Federal Reserve went so far as to patent its system and trademark it and bankrupt this separate municipal entity in 2009, following the Big Short on Wall Street as a scapegoat. The trademark Federal Reserve System went kaput during the 2007-2008 meltdown. You probably haven't been told that in so many words, but yes, the organization went bankrupt, was carved up by its creditors, and its assets, including its names and trademarks, were distributed as loot. In 2017, Chase Bank, one of the controlling shareholders in the Federal Reserve System, received the Federal Reserve name and trademark as part of the bankruptcy settlement. J.P. Morgan received the name and trademark Federal Reserve Board of Governors as part of their share of the spoils. In 2019, what remained of the Federal Reserve after the Federal Reserve System bankruptcy was rolled over into the U.S. Treasury, which has actually been the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, since 1924. To avoid paying these IOUs, they simply collapsed the old Federal Reserve System, incorporated, and entered it into bankruptcy. All our gold and silver were stolen and transported overseas in equitable exchange for worthless paper. And then even the debt represented by those IOUs was discharged in bankruptcy, which should have never been allowed. That answers the question of where all that gold in Fort Knox went. They cheated several large National Association member banks, and we wound up with J.P. Morgan operating as the Federal Reserve and Chase Bank operating as the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, which have been operating these trademarks ever since. This gives the outward appearance that the Federal Reserve System is alive and well, when it's not, and it hasn't been for over a decade. Fact number 8. There is no U.S. Treasury. It's the International Monetary Fund, IMF, an agency of the United Nations. Let's not gloss over what I have said. The fact that there hasn't been a U.S. Treasury since 1924, that's all the IMF in sheep's clothing. All these years, the IMF, an agency of the United Nations, and its spinoff Governmental Services Corporation, United States Inc., has been plundering the assets of the United States Trust, which belong to our Federal Republic. The British Territorial United States of America Incorporated government franchise was entered into bankruptcy by executive order issued by its president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR. He signed over both the debts and the assets of the franchise corporation to the IMF, who was doing business as United States Inc., all capital letters. So the British territorial corporate franchise entered into the receivership of the international bankruptcy trustees, specifically the Secretary of the Treasury of Puerto Rico, who was selected by the named creditors, the International Bank of Reconstruction and Development, IBRD, the World Bank, and the Federal Reserve. Although the 1934 Bankruptcy Act recognized them as the priority creditors, the primary creditors were the hapless American people and their organic states of the Union. But the IMF never bothered to inform them or operate in an honest or appropriate fashion with regard to their material interests. Instead, the IMF, DBA, the United States, Inc., and the bankruptcy trustees chosen by the World Bank, IBRD, and Federal Reserve, the Secretary of the Treasury of Puerto Rico, seized upon all the assets supposedly represented by the foreign cities trusts that the FDR administration created and rolled them over into the Roman Inferior Trust, a Sestake V estate trust. These Roman Inferior Trusts were all operated under our names. For example, Joseph Allen Smith Incorporated, all capital letters. And they were all removed to Puerto Rico for safekeeping, quote unquote, by the bankruptcy trustee, thereby bringing American state assets and the private property assets of American state citizens under Puerto Rican jurisdiction. Back in 1976, during preparations for the end of the federal corporation bankruptcy started by FDR, the Territorial Congress released itself from its duty to act as our trustees and foisted that obligation off onto the United Nations via the International Organizations Immunities Act. As you will see, all the state offices were given to the United Nations. The IMF has falsely presumed that our government is not in operation and that our international claims are not in place, and that the IMF is free to act as our priority creditor of the United States corporations, our employees. Our fiduciary has told the IMF in no uncertain terms that they aren't our Treasury, they aren't our trustees, and they are no better than the Federal Reserve. Since 1944, the United States of America Incorporated's business affairs have been managed by these same international bankruptcy trustees under the direction of these same creditors organized as the International Monetary Fund, IMF, acting under various corporate names, including United States, Inc., the United States of America, Inc., the U.S., Inc., and the E Pluribus Unum, the United States of America, Inc. All of their assets, all of them, belong to us. The national debt, quote unquote, belongs to us. The bid bonds and labor contracts, ours, ours, ours. The indemnity bonds and guarantees and bondary bonds and life force value annuities, all ours. The CUSIP bonds, ours again. All the Puerto Rican foreign guarantor trusts, ours, nobody else's. All the IRS collections, all the Internal Revenue Service collections, and all the property taxes and mortgages, all of it is owed to us, minus a relatively small fee for services we actually contracted for and actually received under the stipulations of our constitutions. This private foreign entity, merely calling itself the Federal Reserve, owes us our purloined assets, our good names, and our purloined credit to the United States Treasury Incorporated and the Department of the United States Treasury Incorporated, two doing business as names of the International Monetary Fund. Similarly, owe us purloined intellectual property assets and bonds. Instead of enforcement of the banking and securities laws, we've had Fed versus IMF fights in which one gang of criminal bank thugs have attacked the other gang of criminal bank thugs, and this turf war has been the only thing holding them in check. This situation is the result of mismanagement, mischaracterization, and breach of trust on the part of the British monarch, former popes, and the French government, which has failed to maintain oversight on the IMF and its operations and criminality in this matter. Fact number 9. Wall Street is a commodity rigging racket run by J.P. Morgan and the private commercial banks. J.P. Morgan Chase, operating as the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, has been loaning itself and other big Wall Street banks immense amounts of your credit to buy up land, businesses, homes, mines, and other actual property belonging to actual people, and they are using a trademark scam to do it. Remember, I told you about this back in Fact 5. All the Federal Reserve banks are now owned lock, stock, and barrel by Wall Street commercial banks. And furthermore, though they continue to pretend that they have something to do with the federal government and continue to hustle Treasury bonds for the non-existent U.S. Treasury, which is really the IMF, this means that the Wall Street central banks have direct access to credit purloined from the American people and are now helping themselves to whatever they want. The banks have all been insolvent since 1930s. They are prohibited by law from loaning their own money or any depositor's money. Nobody's currency has been backed by the banks. It has all been backed by the labor of the people and the value of your country's land, commodity, and product assets. The interest we've all paid to the Federal Reserve was nothing but another gratuitous fraud scheme, a charge for a non-existent service. The Federal Reserve started buying up the Fortune 500 in the 1930s. It continued this in the 1940s and 1950s. By the 1960s, the Fed managers owned at least a majority interest in all the major corporations listed on the American stock exchanges and every market sector. Let me back up. I said at least a majority interest. Well, let me quantify the word majority. Watch this video where a researcher breaks down how much that majority interest amounts to.
This is the very first video that I ever posted on TikTok. Who owns everything? And there's no audio, and that's fine. And it was me looking into the corporate media, me looking into who owns the media. And that blew up right away because it's a question that's on all of our minds. It's a very basic question that's on all of our minds. But it got me thinking, like, who owns all the rest of the stuff? Who owns, like, all these other industries? Who owns the food systems? Who owns the energy systems? Who owns green energy systems? Who owns the military-industrial complex? Who owns transportation? Okay? And by now we kind of all know. And I kind of arrived at the answer that we all know, is that a bunch of shareholders own the whole system. And the top of every shareholder chart is Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street. But it's not just a simple they own the company. They own the shares. And Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street are at the top of every list because they hold all of our retirement accounts and they hold all of our retirement money. So they manage all these shares on our behalf. And when they manage the shares on our behalf, they manage our voting rights in the corporate system, which is kind of a pay-to-play democracy. And when you start to put these pieces of this theory together, the pieces of this truth together of how our corporate system works, the oligarchy, so to speak, the club, the big club, as George Carlin termed it, you start to realize exactly how each piece links into the next to understand where this top-down control really comes from and what's really moving and shaking in these markets, so to speak. And when I hit 1 million followers on TikTok, about 8 months after I started on TikTok, this is back in January of 2024, I put together a video for 1 million subscribers and to put the whole thesis into one go. And this is that video. And we're just going to play the whole thing as it is because it really puts it all together and it's going to walk us in to where we're going right here.
Corporate grocery store. What if I told you that all corporations are actually just one giant mega corporation? And I'm not talking about metaphorically. And I'm not talking about BlackRock. I'm talking about what's really behind BlackRock. See, we hit 1 million followers on TikTok this week, and I've been waiting to post this video since the very first video that I made, laying the groundwork of understanding so that we're all going to understand this now that we're here. So let's break it down real simple. If you're going to go grocery shopping at a corporate grocery store, all these corporations are owned by these institutions. They're highlighted in red if they're on all 4 of these sheets. They're darker orange if they're on 3 of them, and light orange if they're on 2. And there's only a couple that only appear once. It's mostly the same money. But we go deeper. If you go for the biggest tech companies, it's basically the exact same list for all 4 of these. That would be Vanguard, BlackRock, State Street, Fidelity, T. Rowe Price, Geode, which is similar to Fidelity Associates.
So if you need any context, when you look up any public corporation, any public company, these are the big companies, the ones that we all know and love: Amazon, Apple, Archer Daniel Midland, Campbell's Soup, General Mills. All of those, they're public companies, meaning that you can buy stock of them, like a GameStop share, for example. And when you buy stock of them, you buy one little slice of ownership, and that gives you one vote in their corporate elections. And so when you look up their ownership sheets to see who owns the most stock, you're looking at the biggest voters, the people that have the biggest voting power in how those companies are run. And when you look at the whole marketplace, at all the public corporations, you notice that the top of their ownership sheets, their top 10 holders, it's all the same people. And it's not people. It's banks, financial institutions, and investment management firms like BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. So that's the level that we're at here. And we spent like many months exploring that level, looking at all these different companies, exploring how the financial mechanisms, the economic mechanics of that work. And then we're going to go to the next layer deeper.
JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, and then Northern Trust is on 3 of them, and Capital World Investors is the exact same thing as Capital Research and Management Company. So you might think, okay, these are the institutions that own the whole stock market, but who owns them? And see, if you've been around here for a minute, you already know. They all own each other, just a giant cross ownership pool. And this is where it gets really interesting. Because see, way back before I'd even posted a single video, I was sitting in my office reading this report from an anonymous user on Reddit. And he had noticed the exact same thing that I'm talking about right now. And he wrote a program to put all that data into a visualization so we can see who owns who. And I'm about to show you what he figured out. Let's take BlackRock, for example. This is a list of the top institutional owners of BlackRock and how much of the company they own. And if you visualize it, it looks like this, where the whole square is all of BlackRock's stock, and they get a percentage of that square based on how much they own. And the important colors to note are that white symbolizes us, retail investors, and gray symbolizes insiders that work at the company. So that would be like Larry Fink's stock, among other people. And everything else is other giant corporations, investment banks, like BlackRock themselves own a little bit. State Street owns some. Capital World Management owns some. Bank of America owns some. You see how this works? But then you think about it and you're like, well, wait a minute, because all of these institutions are owned by other institutions, right? So what if we put that data in here? Well, he did. And it looks like this. And you realize that all of this that was owned by Merrill Lynch is actually owned by all of these other institutions and a little bit of us, retail, up there at the top. But here, we've only replaced Merrill Lynch's section. What about all of these guys? Well, then it looks like this. Remember, white is retail investors like you and me, and everything else is giant mega corporations. And if you go one layer deeper, filling in all those corporations with their corporations, you see how this program's working? And so then we simplify it to just black, gray, and white. And this is who owns BlackRock. White is retail investors like you and me. Gray is insiders at all of these corporations like CEOs and other executives. And black is just corporations owning each other. We'll call it megacorp.
So what that just showed is that at BlackRock, and you'll see that this is true of basically every mega corporation in America and around the world, the biggest voting share is held by other corporations. And those other corporations that are voting, that are holding the shares at the top of everything, they're all the financial institutions. And so it's the financial industry, it's this financial cabal, for lack of a better word, that control the majority of voting shares at every public corporation, and thereby they can push corporate policy at every corporation. They choose who gets hired and fired. They choose what policies are adopted. They choose how our entire world marches forwards, because corporations are the biggest businesses in the world. They're what's building our culture. They're what's making our media. They're what's giving us our food. They're what's making us our clothes. They're what's selling us all of our products. And so when they're all making decisions based upon the voting decisions of the black space, the mega corporate blob, it's no wonder that we wind up in such a corporate hellscape and that America looks the way that America does. That's what this graph really helps to show. That's what this visualization really paints for us. And then we start to do it with other institutions.
This is the same process done for Bank of America and for State Street and for Best Buy, Amazon, Macy's, groceries, food, ingredients, building and selling homes, even less white, meaning us, retail ownership. As far as I can tell, there's only one company on the entire stock market that is not owned by megacorp.
Shout out.
Do you know? It's GameStop. Except that this photo's out of date because it's from a few years ago.
Still true.
Probably looks more like this if you believe the public info, which is a big But more on that another time. This is not a video about GameStop. This is about Megacorp. Because see, when all of the owners own each other, all of their interests are aligned. BlackRock wants State Street to do well because State Street wants BlackRock to do well because they both own each other. So
Technically, actually, BlackRock owns State Street outright nowadays. They bought them. But the same is true in every direction up there in those financial institutions. It's all shared ownership, and so it's all aligned interests.
who is the real final boss behind all the money? Well, isn't that the million-dollar question? And ever since I've been asking those more important questions, my follower growth went from this to this. So you're not going to find those answers on this channel. You're going to have to go follow me in other places.
That was when TikTok was getting mega censored. And we've been exploring those questions ever since.
All I'll say for now is that the next time you buy a product from a corporation like Nike or Costco or Best Buy or Amazon or any of these corporations, you're buying it from the mega corporation. They're all owned by the same big money. And it's all one big siphon, just vacuuming money out of our pockets up to the people on top. We'll make another video about how exactly they do that shortly.
The phony stock market isn't being driven by any actual increase in the value of the underlying assets or any expansion of the asset base at all. The stock market has been kept alive by corporations reinvesting in their own stock and in injections of government pension fund investments as the managers desperately try to shore up the value of their prior investments. All the bull market activity that people observe is contrived. And just like the big crash of 1929, smaller investors are being lured into the market and even being foolish enough to leverage their investments just in time for the big boys to pull the plug. Let's watch the Federal Reserve at work. Have you seen this video by this financial analyst who exposed just 2 weeks ago to America and the world that we've just been screwed by the feds, i.e. JP Morgan, again? Watch.
While the mainstream media was busy talking about holiday shopping and celebrity gossip, the most significant financial event of the decade took place in the dark plumbing of the U.S. banking system. Late Friday night, after the markets closed and the public turned off their screens, the Federal Reserve's emergency discount window saw a spike in activity that we haven't seen since the 2008 collapse. We have confirmed reports that over $25 billion in emergency liquidity was injected directly into the balance sheets of the major bullion banks. Why? Because the silver squeeze broke them. The vertical move to $85 didn't just hurt their pride, it vaporized their capital. They faced a margin call they couldn't meet, and instead of letting the free market liquidate them, the Fed stepped in to print them a lifeline. It is official. The bailout has begun. The Federal Reserve promised they were fighting inflation. They promised they were shrinking their balance sheet. They lied. This $25 billion injection is shadow QE. It is money printing by another name. They call it temporary liquidity swaps or bank term funding. But let's call it what it is. Inflation. They're creating currency out of thin air to fill the black hole created by JP Morgan's bad bets on silver. Every dollar they print to save the banks dilutes the value of the dollars in your pocket. You are paying for their bailout through the destruction of your purchasing power. The inflation you see at the grocery store next month will be the direct result of the button they pressed last night. We must address the elephant in the room. JP Morgan is the custodian of the silver market, but they are also the biggest short seller. It is a conflict of interest that would be illegal in any honest system. When silver gapped up this week, JP Morgan's short positions went deeply underwater. The losses are estimated to be in the tens of billions. Under normal rules, a brokerage would force them to liquidate, to buy back the silver at any price. But JP Morgan is too big to fail. If they are forced to buy silver on the open market, the price would go to $500 overnight, and the bank would collapse. So the Fed gave them cash to keep the position open. They're using taxpayer money to suppress the price of the people's money. For those who don't know, the discount window is the lender of last resort. Banks only go there when they are desperate. It carries a stigma. If a bank borrows from the window, it tells the market, we are broke. Nobody else will lend to us. The fact that usage spiked to $25 billion indicates a systemic heart attack. The interbank lending market has frozen. Banks don't trust each other anymore because they don't know who is holding the toxic silver shorts. They know someone is about to blow up, and they don't want to be the one holding the bag. The credit crunch has arrived, and it was triggered by a shiny gray metal. Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, kept telling us he could achieve a soft landing. He said he could raise rates without breaking something. He was wrong. He broke the bond market, he broke the real estate market, and now he has broken the commodities market. The massive leverage in the system cannot survive higher interest rates combined with a commodity squeeze. The system is cracking. This bailout proves that the Fed has pivoted. They have stopped fighting inflation and started fighting collapse. They have chosen to save the banks at the cost of the currency. The soft landing was a myth. We are bracing for a crash landing. In 2008, the crisis was about bad mortgages, housing. In 2025, the crisis is about bad commodities derivatives, silver, gold. Housing is slow. You can foreclose on a house over months. Commodities are fast. The price changes every second. The speed of this implosion is terrifying the regulators. Unlike a house, which has value even if the market drops, a naked short position has infinite risk. If silver goes to $100, the losses are theoretically infinite. The hole in the balance sheet is growing faster than the Fed can print money to fill it. We are looking at a derivatives crisis that makes 2008 look like a warm-up act. How did silver react to the news of the bailout? It didn't drop. It rallied. Smart money knows that bailout equals inflation. If the Fed is printing money, the value of that money goes down, and the value of hard assets goes up. Silver is sniffing out the devaluation. It is acting as the ultimate hedge. The banks tried to use the bailout money to short the market again, but it was like throwing paper into a furnace. The market absorbed the selling and asked for more. The psychological barrier has been broken. Investors now know the Fed is trapped, and they are front-running the inevitable devaluation. This bailout creates the ultimate moral hazard. It sends a message to every hedge fund and bank on Wall Street: take as much risk as you want. Gamble with depositor money. Manipulate the markets. If you win, you keep the bonus. If you lose, the Fed will print $25 billion to save you. There is no punishment for failure. This encourages even more reckless behavior. They will double down on their shorts. They will leverage up again. They are gambling addicts who have been given a limitless credit card by the casino owner. This guarantees that the next crash will be even bigger. Do you think China is ignoring this? They are watching the Fed debase the dollar in real time. This confirms their thesis that the US dollar is unsafe. As the Fed prints, China accelerates its dumping of US Treasury bonds. They are selling the debt and buying the metal. The bailout has effectively handed a geopolitical victory to the East. Every dollar printed to save JP Morgan weakens the US standing on the global stage. We are sacrificing our currency's credibility to protect a corrupt banking cartel. Just because they printed money today doesn't mean your deposits are safe. The $25 billion alone, not a gift. If the banks cannot pay it back, they will look for other sources of capital. That source is you. The Dodd-Frank Act still allows for bail-ins, taking depositor funds to recapitalize a failing bank. The Fed's printing press is the first line of defense. Your savings account is the second. Do not get comfortable. This liquidity injection is a temporary patch on a leaking dam. When the water rises again, they will come for the depositors. We are walking the path of Weimar Germany. In the 1920s, Germany printed money to pay its debts. The result was hyperinflation, where a loaf of bread cost a wheelbarrow of cash. We are doing the same thing. We are printing money to pay the debts of the banks. The laws of economics do not care if you are America or Zimbabwe. If you expand the money supply faster than the production of goods, prices must rise. Silver at $85 is just the beginning. In a hyperinflationary scenario, silver could be $500 or $1,000, and it still wouldn't be expensive, because the dollar measuring it would be worthless. You might look at the stock market hitting all-time highs and think the economy is strong. It is not. The stock market is rising for the same reason silver is rising. The currency is collapsing. In Venezuela, the stock market went up 10,000% while the people starved. A rising stock market in the face of economic collapse is not a sign of health. It is a sign of a crack-up boom. The Fed's money printing flows into assets, inflating their nominal price while their real value remains stagnant. Do not be fooled by the green numbers on CNBC. The bailout does nothing to solve the physical shortage. Printing dollars does not print silver. Tesla still needs metal for batteries. Apple still needs metal for iPhones. The industrial users don't care about the Fed's balance sheet. They care about physical inventory, and the inventory is gone. The bailout allows the banks to survive on paper, but it does not replenish the vaults. The disconnect between the financial world, paper, and the real world, physical, has never been wider. Eventually, reality wins. This emergency loan is the first step towards yield curve control, YCC. This is when the Fed explicitly prints money to keep interest rates low because the government can't afford the interest on its debt. And once YCC starts, it is game over for the currency. It signals to the world that the bond market is broken. Japan tried it and destroyed the yen. Now the US is trying it. This is the end game for the fiat dollar system. Silver investors have been waiting for this moment for decades. It is finally here. The public is starting to wake up. Searches for how to buy gold and bank failure are trending on Google. The average American realizes that something is wrong. Their grocery bill is up 30%. Their rent is up 20%. And now they see the banks getting a bailout while they struggle to pay for gas. This anger is fueling the move into hard assets. People are taking their money out of the rigged casino and putting it into something tangible. The retail army is growing, and they are armed with information and physical silver. Banking is a confidence game. It relies on the public believing that their money is safe. The moment the Fed had to print $25 billion in secret overnight, that confidence was shattered. If the banks were healthy, they wouldn't need a bailout. The fact that they need it proves they are sick. Trust is like a mirror. Once it's broken, you can't fix it. Investors are moving from return on capital to return of capital. They just want their money back, and the banks don't have it. Let's not forget the $2 quadrillion derivatives market. Silver is just the spark. If JP Morgan falls, the counterparty risk spreads to interest rate swaps, oil futures, and foreign exchange contracts. The entire financial web is interconnected. A default in silver triggers a margin call in bonds, which triggers a sell-off in stocks. It is a domino effect. The Fed is frantically trying to glue the first domino back in place, but the glue isn't holding. The wind from the silver squeeze is blowing too hard. In a world where the central bank is debasing the currency to save the elite, you have only one option. Be your own central bank. Hold assets that have no counterparty risk. Silver, gold, land, Bitcoin, in self-custody. Do not leave your wealth in the blast radius of a failing bank. The bailout is a signal to exit the system. It is the fire alarm ringing. Do not sit in the burning theater waiting for instructions. Find the exit. If this is happening in the last week of 2025, imagine what 2026 holds. We are entering a year of extreme volatility, monetary debasement, and social unrest. The Fed pivot has happened. The printing press is on. The flood of liquidity is coming. Asset prices will soar, but the standard of living will crash. This is the inflationary depression. Prepare for a world where cash is trash and silver is king. The headline is official. The Fed bailed out the banks. They chose the banks over you. They chose inflation over stability. They chose to rig the game rather than let it play out. But in doing so, they have sealed the fate of the dollar. The $25 billion printed this weekend is just the down payment on the coming collapse. The silver squeeze didn't end. It just leveled up. The banks have the printers, but we have the metal. And in the end, metal wins.
One word I want to highlight that he said to focus your attention on. Not a word, but two letters. QE. QE stands for quantitative easing, which means a monetary policy action where a central bank purchases predetermined amounts of government bonds, company shares, or other financial assets, liquidity, in order to artificially simulate economic activity. Translation, let's just print some more Federal Reserve notes and fake it till we make it. This is what a bank bailout looks like. And what exactly is a bailout? They just steal more of your future credit to save their patooties. Those two words capture the entirety of the point that I really want to make. But there's another question that pulses in the back of my mind. What happened to the silver? Well, you'll have to wait to the next episode to get an answer to that question. Fact number 10. The federal income tax is a myth. What do I mean by myth? I mean a widely held but false belief or idea. I present to you 4 proofs that will dispel the myth of the federal income tax. Proof number 1, it does not fund government. Proof number 2, it's not the 16th Amendment to the Constitution. Proof number 3, is not required by law. And proof number 4, it's not certain, as in death and taxes. It's revocable. Let me begin with proof number 1. The federal income tax does not fund government. The territorial U.S. Congress and the feds never developed an honest means of removing their debt notes from the economy. They just continued to use the same debt notes over and over and over again for hundreds of transactions each. Instead of having a means to retire or cancel these notes upon exchange, they sought to control the inflation caused by this practice by using the IRS to inflict a federal income tax and extract the excess Federal Reserve notes using this separate mechanism. Inevitably, though, they couldn't keep up with the intrinsic inflation built into their fiat currency system. Tax claims and assessments grew, and draconian illegal confiscations of private property escalated to insane heights to no avail. The people who were the victims of this scheme simply couldn't make enough profit for the corporations to tax. Every expansion of the economy was accompanied by a commensurate escalation of inflation and debt. By the 1980s, the Grace Commission report revealed that the interest being paid to the banks on the factually non-existent U.S. debt exceeded all payments that is ledgered as gift and estate taxes coming in from the tax system. That is, they were losing the battle to take enough Federal Reserve notes, the debt, out of the economy via the federal income tax. So the real world purpose of the federal income tax is to remove money from the economy, specifically your private sector economy, which is a deflationary action and serves to increase the value of the remaining dollars. The federal income tax, then, is the pressure valve of the fiat currency system. The tax collection deflates the currency and increases its relative market value, while the government's printing of the money is inflationary and decreases the value of the currency. So now you fully know what the actual use and purpose of the federal income tax is and why it is necessary in a fiat economy. Without its deflationary offset functions, there would only be inflation and a constant, steady, inexorable devaluation of the fiat currency. Proof number 2. The federal income tax is not the 16th Amendment to the Constitution. I'm going to read to you this memo straight from the horse's mouth. Here is Internal Revenue Service, Department of the Treasury. Memo. To all district directors, April 4th, 1985. On March 5th, 1985, a charge of tax evasion was filed in U.S. District Court in Indianapolis, Indiana, by U.S. Attorney George Duncan. The charges were dismissed. The defense attorney, Lowell B. Craft of Huntsville, Alabama, presented irrefutable evidence that the 16th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was never properly ratified. This amendment, which established the income tax, was signed into law despite serious defects. In reality, only 2 states ratified the amendment, and ratification requires 36 states to be valid. The effect of this is such that every tax paid into the Treasury since 1913 is due and refundable to every citizen and business. The official position of the service is, as it has always been, to aid and assist the citizens of the United States. We will not publish or advertise this finding, as a total immediate refund would cause a serious drain on the resources of the Treasury. For those citizens who become aware of this finding and apply for a total refund, expedite their refund documents as quickly and as quietly as possible. A simple 1040X form will suffice until a new form is designed and printed. Advise each of your managers that they are not to discuss this situation with anyone. There will be no written communications, and you are to destroy this memorandum. The Secretary of the Treasury assures me that there will be no reduction in the workforce, as this refunding activity will take a minimum of 5 years to complete. Further directions will be forwarded as need arises. Roscoe L. Egger, Jr., Commissioner of Internal Revenue. I have an additional piece of evidence for this proof. There was a man who is the unrefuted expert on this topic who wrote a book called The Law That Never Was. I want to play for you an interview held with the author, Bill Benson, and what he had to say on what he saw and found out firsthand. Watch this.
Bill Benson has been one of the most important freedom pioneers of the 20th century. Since the early 80s, he has single-handedly driven a powerful wedge into the presumed validity of the federal income tax and the IRS. He'll tell you the story of his extensive research trip to the capital cities of all 48 states to assemble the evidence that the 16th Amendment to the Constitution was never ratified. His 17,000 certified notarized documents present incontrovertible legal proof that the income tax and the IRS have no basis in law. He's persisted in his crusade in spite of great pressure against him, enduring severe treatment in federal prison and ignoring all attempts to call him off by threat or bribe. His story is both shocking and inspiring. I'm joined in my interview with him here by Claudia Hermer.
What I'd like to start with is the history of how you got involved in this research regarding the 16th Amendment.
I was a former investigator for the Criminal Investigation Division for the Illinois Department of Revenue. And in that position, it was my duty and responsibility to collect the excise tax, not the direct tax. There was a great deal of corruption that went on within that department. And we had one case that was worth $3 million. And the attorneys for the state sold that case and settled that case for $250,000. That ruffled my feathers, and I went to the director of the Department of Revenue, and he said, Bill, why don't you just shut your mouth and take the money like everyone else does? Take the envelope, let him put it in your car, let him put it at the table when you're having lunch or wherever. But remain silent. I tell him I'm sorry. I wasn't raised that way, nor do I intend to do it. You have the wrong guy for the job if you want me to take money and to take bribes. No, thank you. He said, if you don't remain silent, I shall fire you. I said, you might as well do it like yesterday, because if you do, the day you fire me, I shall sue you for violation of First Amendment rights. And we both kept our word. The director of the Illinois Department of Revenue fired me, and I then sued him. I had an attorney in Chicago, and just myself, the two of us, worked against the largest law firms in the city of Chicago. It took us 6.5 years to get into court before a jury of 6 in a civil case. The jury found in my favor and awarded me $350,000 for violation of First Amendment rights and for the dismissal and firing of me from my position. That was back in the 1970s.
What led to the research regarding the 16th Amendment?
When I was fired, I never say dismissed because I was fired, and I did sue and I did win. I began to work with the attorney that had my case. We had an income tax case in the state of Indiana. It was a willful failure to file case. We had about 300 pages of documentation that I obtained from a man by the name of Martin Beckman. Martin Beckman got that documentation from a man by the name of Dean Hirsch from Cheyenne, Wyoming. Dean had called the various secretaries of state, written them letters, asking them for the research work on the 16th Amendment to the United States Constitution. The answer came back from the various states that we are not going to do your legal research. If you want it, come to the states and get it. Dean didn't go to the states and get it, nor did Martin Beckman. During the course of the trial, we made an attempt to use the 300 pages that I purchased from Martin Beckman. Beckman got the documentation from Dean Hirsch, copied it, put it in file folders with the name of the states on each file folder. There was only one state that caught my eye, and that was the state of Kentucky. On February the 8th of 1910, on page 487 of the Senate Journal, the Senate was in session, and they were voting on the 16th Amendment to the United States Constitution. There were 9 senators that voted for the amendment and 22 that voted against. I asked the attorney, because I was sitting at the conference table with him as a paralegal, to make sure that we try to get this documentation before the court let the jury see it, and we did that. We had Martin Beckman come in from Billings, Montana, to testify in that case as far as the documents that he obtained. He never told us that he got the documentation from Dean Hirsch. I didn't find that out till a long time later, probably a couple of years or so later. The judge said that the thing that we needed to make our case was that documentation must be certified, it must be notarized, and you must have a witness to testify to. Mr. Beckman was not a witness to testify to because he did not do the work. So the judge permitted Mr. Beckman to testify, but then he struck his testimony, and when he finished testifying, he then ordered him removed from the courtroom. And, of course, the documentation was not entered into evidence, nor was it seen by the jury. The jury deliberated in that case for about 45 minutes and found the defendant guilty of willful failure to file a tax return. And after that case was concluded, we had dinner that evening, and I said, well, as far as I'm concerned, the judge has given us our marching orders. The only thing we have to do is go to all 48 states and get the documentation certified and notarized. And the attorney says, Bill, you're crazy. You can't do that. I says, of course, we can go to all 48 states, but we have to find the funds that will support a project like that. It was very fortunate for us that there was a man by the name of George Sitka, who I wrote about in Volume 1 of The Law That Never Was, because George called and said, do you mind if I come to Chicago and talk to you about what you want to do? I said, not at all. When George arrived in Chicago within a couple days, he said, how come you're not on the road like now? I said, George, we lack funds. He said, you have an open checkbook. He said, so now you can get on the road like tomorrow. I said, no, it'll take a couple of weeks, but if we have an open checkbook, I'm on my way. And that's what started the year-long study to all 48 state capitals. I went to each and every capital, researching the 16th Amendment to the United States Constitution in every phase that I could find, in every book that was available to me at that time. And after I had completed 27 states, I knew that there was a very, very serious problem. Of course, I knew that before, because not one state out of the 27 that I had looked at to begin with, not one had ratified the amendment. In one way or the other, they all made changes. Capitalization, punctuation, wording. They did not agree with the wishes of the Congress of the United States, so they changed the amendment. And that is something they do not have the authority nor the power to do. There was a memorandum that I found at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. that was drafted by a man by the name of Reuben J. Clark on February the 15th of 1913. And Reuben Clark pointed out the discrepancies, the errors of what the states had done. He told Philander Chase Knox, who was the Secretary of State, that the states had not ratified. Philander Chase Knox went ahead anyhow, even though he had the certified notarized documents that came back from the states showing that they did not agree with the wishes of Congress. And on February the 25th of 1913, he signed a proclamation stating that the 16th Amendment had been ratified by all of the states, including the state of Kentucky, when very clearly on its face you can see that 9 will never become greater than 22. Believe me, I can't wait until I get back into court or have the IRS indict me or Commissioner Rossetti indict me or someone in the federal government indict me, and put one of the federal judges on the witness stand that I know very well and ask him, when in your wildest dreams or comprehension will 9 ever become greater than 22? You explain that to the jury. If you can get that by, then I'll file a tax return, but not until.
Well, Bill, how many of these certified documents do you have?
I have 17,000 certified notarized documents. There's probably a little bit in excess of, but when I went to trial, I had to give a copy of that documentation to the prosecutors and to the judge. I personally made all 34,000 copies on my own copy machine because you've got to be extremely careful with the certified notarized documents. If you break the ribbon, if you cut the ribbon, or if the seal is dislodged, then the documentation is no longer useful. It is worthless. You have to go back to the state and do the work all over again. The documents have to be notarized. They're certified to begin with when the Secretary of State sends to the governor of each and every state the 16th Amendment, as in this case, or any other amendment. When he sends that to the various states, the governor calls the General Assembly into session and tells them that the United States Congress would like them to adopt the 16th Amendment or whatever amendment is before them. And the only thing that they can do is to vote with the yay, with the nay, with the yes, with the no, and that is all. Otherwise, we would have 48 different versions of the law. Which one should we go by?
Okay, so you now have these 17 to 18,000 certified documents in your possession.
They are in my possession, yes. And they're ready to go in court anytime anyone indicts me or indicts anyone else that I might represent in one way or the other, because there is a reliance defense program that I prepared in 1993. And since that time to this day, no one has had a problem after they've brought a large box of material to the IRS, which is a 14 by 14 by 14 box that weighs 43 pounds. They're all government records, government documents, government material. It isn't anything that I've really written or drafted. It's what the government has done.
Proof number 3. The federal income tax is not required by law. I think number 2 already addressed this, but now let you hear it from the horse's mouth. I'm going to play 2 videos, one right after the other. The first is the federal tax professionals telling you, and the second is a juror who sat on a federal income tax case jury in Illinois telling you the same thing. Let's watch.
There is no law, and to date, nobody has been able to show that there is a law for the average American citizen working day in and day out to pay an income tax.
But We the People Foundation for Constitutional Education put a full-page ad in the USA Today on July 7, 2000. And within the body of that ad was a $50,000 challenge for anyone that could show the law. And to me, $50,000 is a lot of money. So I went after that and did the research based on the fact that I thought, let's put this baby to bed. I'm hearing all these rumors. I'm going to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I'll answer these people's questions that are asking me, and then I'll win this $50,000. And, based on the research that I did throughout the year 2000 and that I'm still doing, I have not found that law. I've asked Congress. We've asked a lot of people in the IRS commissioners, helpers. They can't answer, because if they answer, the American people are going to know that this whole thing is a fraud.
There is no law. There is no law that requires the average American worker in the private sector to pay a direct, unapportioned tax on their labor and compensation for services. There is no law.
I really expected that, of course there's a law that you can point to in the law book, the code that requires you to file a tax return. Of course there is. Maybe I don't know what it is right then as he was speaking to me, but sure. So naively, I agreed to go off and research it and get back to him. 3.5 months later, I was at that point where I couldn't find the statute that clearly made a person liable, at least not me and most people I know, and I had no choice in my mind except to resign.
I had to leave the IRS because I presented evidence that I had accumulated indicating that the agency was violating the law and violating people's rights. And I asked the agency for a response to my sincere concerns. And the answer I got was that they would not respond to my concerns and that they would provide me with the paperwork necessary to tender my resignation.
You can look through the statutes and look for the law that requires you to pay. And when you do that, you can't identify a law that requires the average person in America who earns a wage and works in private business to pay an income tax.
American citizens, along with the foundation, have been asking the IRS to specifically provide them with the underlying legal foundation upon which they administer and enforce the personal income tax laws in our country.
At the national level, when people would attempt to contact somebody of a much higher authority, say the commissioner, same kind of thing. They would get answers that were in effect non-answers.
You have to understand that an agency which will unlawfully impose a tax that doesn't exist is not going to care. If we, the people, don't know what our rights are, they're not going to tell us.
If Americans just learned that the IRS was actually knowingly deceiving them, that would be enough for them to rise up and put a stop to it.
100% of what is collected is absorbed solely by interest on the federal debt. All individual income tax revenues are gone before 1 nickel is spent on the services taxpayers expect from government. People have been told, that you need this income tax system to fund government, which is absolutely ridiculous. My question is, well, if that's true, how did we fund government from 1776 to 1913?
The main purpose of the income tax is not to raise revenue, but to redistribute wealth and to control society.
A lot of people might say, well, gee, if there wasn't an income tax, what would happen to education? They don't understand that education is paid for the most part, out of state and local taxes, your property tax. People might say, well, how are we going to build and maintain our highways? If there's no money coming into the government, we need our highways. There is a tax on every gallon of gasoline that people buy. Proceeds from the income tax do not pay for highway construction.
I believe that in both spirit and substance, our tax system has come to be un-American. Death and taxes may be inevitable, but unjust taxes are not.
This small booklet includes the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence. This is a document that every citizen should read. It's a document which freed an entire nation. This is the Internal Revenue Code, and this document and the unlawful application of this document by the Internal Revenue Service has enslaved the nation that this document attempted to free.
I felt an overwhelming need to understand why juries were finding innocent people guilty of not filing a tax return when there was no law requiring them to do so. So I went to talk to Marcy Brooks, a juror who used her common sense and did not allow the judge to railroad the jury into a guilty verdict.
He was being tried for 4 counts of not filing his income tax.
Okay.
And our question was, well, what is to decide? Either he did or he didn't. It never occurred to us that he might actually be innocent while at the same time not filing. In the federal government, it is not a felony not to file taxes. Finally, they said, okay, if we're going to get this guy, we're going to have to put it in the state. They called up the IRS agent. Agent Craner.
Craner? Yeah. Robert Craner. Mm-hmm. This is Ken Doherty, who's also an investigator with the Illinois Department of Revenue. This is a request for a copy of the delegation of authority order.
Right, and I talked to my boss about that, and he said that my badge is that.
Badge is the authority. I thought it had to be in writing.
The last question that the defense asked him was, did you write any of this down? And Agent Craner looked right at him and right at us, and he said, I never wrote anything down. And yet when we saw the video, there he was, writing notes, you know. And so I'm thinking, okay, at this point, the judge is supposed to say, Agent Craner, it is clear that you have committed perjury. It wasn't even noticed. It finally came to the climax. Mr. Harrell looked right at the prosecutor, and he said, I will tell you the same thing I have told over and over again to government officials. You show me the law that requires me to file a tax return, and I'll be glad to do it.
And again, I ask, under what is the requirement that you claim under the private duty stuff? And the requirement under the regulations is what section? My question to you is, what particular act are we discussing here that I am liable to do these things if you claim I'm liable to do?
Your exact question would be again? Okay, what is the section that what? But I guess I'm still not understanding your question, Mr. Harrell.
Well, you must be familiar with what that you have the police powers to enforce.
Yes.
The prosecutor absolutely ignored him. And he started slandering Mr. Harrell. Just started attacking his character.
They're calling us tax cheats, they're calling us fanatics, they're calling us weirdos. I don't care what you call me, but I have one question. Where is the law? Show me the law.
Can't let this turn into a rational debate, because if they do, they lose it. So they have to insult people and say it's frivolous.
We felt like that there was an overall arrogance and that they were railroading Mr. Harrell and wanting us to participate. Judge Coogan, he looked right at us and he said, I will instruct the jury according to the law. We were sent to deliberation. The judge promised us that he would give us the law. And we looked and we looked and it was not there. We wrote a note to the judge asking for a copy of the law. 10 minutes later, we get a note back. You have everything you need. But there was no law. And he had promised us. At that point, I felt betrayed. I felt like this man promised us the law, and that's what this whole thing is about, the law. We request it, and he still denies us the law.
And the reason they didn't do it was why?
Because there is no law. Remember, we're talking about the Illinois state law here, okay, which is a law in Illinois. So we got out that law, and we read it several times, and I said, okay, wait, you know, because they kept saying, but this is a law in Illinois. And I said, look at the beginning of it. It says, anyone required to file a federal income tax return is required to file an Illinois tax return. I said, if it is true that he's not required to file a federal return, then that nullifies the Illinois law. Two people, they kept saying, but he's going to get by with it. And I said, what is he getting by with but his rights? If there is no law, he's not breaking a law. He's just standing on his rights. Are we going to deny him that? That's when this one juror sat back and kind of rolled his eyes and he said, you mean we don't have to pay taxes? All of a sudden we realized that this trial was much bigger. And the ramifications of this trial were going to be so broad if it actually got out. I mean, it's like we had just discovered this great government secret. And so when we came out, for the delivering of the verdict, the judge was, I'm sure, even at this point, I'm sure he still thought we would give a guilty verdict. And the reason I say that is because of the look on his face when the first not guilty was read. His face just turned white. I mean, it's like, I don't believe this. The second time, you could hear people out in the audience, just in the courtroom, just going, wow, and the judge is just getting red in the face. I mean, he was just livid. And the judge got up and left. Yes. I sat there and I thought, this truly is a victory for the people. And I have never felt more patriotic. And I knew that we had done the right thing. I looked at that man, Mr. Harrell, and I thought, the system might not work all the time, but this time, for that man, it did.
Proof number 4. The federal income tax obligation is revocable. Lastly, for this proof, you've heard it said, nothing is certain but death and taxes. Well, not true. I want to show you my personal proof how I know that you can revoke your election to be a taxpayer. Your W-2 is a tax obligation that your employer contracted with the Internal Revenue Service to collect from their taxpayers. Well, what if you don't want to be a taxpayer? Because I sure didn't. At the last job I worked, I didn't pay federal income tax, not state income tax, not city income tax, and neither did I pay the Social Security FICA taxes. And why not? I revoked my election to be a taxpayer, not just to pay taxes. There's a difference. And I declined to contract into the federal pension plan. How? Well, for that, you will have to watch my video linked in my source list titled Buyer Beware Contracts on YouTube to get a full explanation on how I did it. But in short, let me show you 5 documents. Here's my W-4. I redid my W-4. And the thing that I did different was I put no contract where the Social Security number goes. I put exempt on line 4, which I always have done for the last 20 years, so that wasn't new. But then I put my signature without prejudice above my signature. Should have put all rights reserved there above it as well, but couldn't fit above it. Then I redid my state income tax as well. I put no contract for my state income taxes. And on it, I checked, I am exempt. And I scratched out the 1 through 8 because if you read it, you'll see that it doesn't apply to my case, but A does. Then I signed without prejudice again. Now with these 2 W-4s, I also added a verified notice of revocation of election. I'll attach that to the source list so you can take a look at that. Then I submitted it all to my employer, whom I've been working for about 5 years at this time. It took a few emails back and forth for them to change my pay stub to say exactly what I wanted it to say. This area here that says federal taxable income and statuses, and this area here that says filing status and all the income that is withdrawn. This is what I wanted to change to. I wanted this area to say nothing and this area to say nothing. And that's exactly how it looks by the time my process was over. My thinking was if I had it to say nothing, that I had no federal taxable income at all. This way, I knew they would not be able to even create a W-2 at the end of the year. And I was correct because I never got one. And then I discovered a bonus I wasn't even expecting, but found out about later. Here is my portal, my employee portal. One day I looked in there just to check, and I discovered they also changed my status. Independent contractor, employer exempt, is Ohioan, state national, federal income tax, state income tax, Social Security, and Medicare. I had successfully revoked all income taxes and Social Security obligations. Fact number 11, our justice system is the #1 securities fraud racket run by the foreign agents of the bar and the Internal Revenue Service via CUSIP, AUTOCRIS, SSN, and CRIS tracking systems. The two most destructive agencies in terms of asset plundering and theft from the American people are by far the Internal Revenue Service, founded in 1925, and the American Bar Association. They are two Delaware corporations exercising federal agency contracts, both owned and operated, last time we checked, by a single corrupt foreign holding company called Northern Trust Incorporated, as private for-profit foreign debt collection agencies. They are not units of government, not professional associations, not even nonprofit organizations. They are criminal syndicates operating under color of law and semantic deceit in violation of their corporate charters and the Bar Association treaty allowing them to be here. Find the owners, operators, and shareholders of Northern Trust Incorporated, and you will have located the persons responsible for the unlawful and illegal activities of both the Internal Revenue Service and the American Bar Association for the past century. They are guilty of press ganging that has been outlawed for 200 years and the securitization of living flesh as slave traders, which has been outlawed since 1926. This is how they do it. In every criminal court case that gets filed with the court clerk, the judge, prosecutor, and defense attorney all share in 10 to 20 basis points each on the securities created on court cases. So they each have a financial interest in your guilt. They are railroading you. They are charging over $1 million for every felony charge, and now up to $50,000 for every misdemeanor. So it's not a small conflict of interest for them. It's huge. A judge gets $10,000, and the prosecutor and defense attorneys get $5,000 each for every misdemeanor, $200,000 for the judge, and $100,000 each to the prosecutor and defense attorney for every felony. The sheriff is also paid a percentage on every guilty verdict that comes out of the prosecutor's office. Our entire justice system is human trafficking for profit under corporate veils. This is how and why they have a 96% plus conviction rate. And if you are found innocent, it doesn't matter to them. They're going to make money off of both parties, and in all cases, civil and criminal. Watch this video clip where a judge's son explains how the courts securitize you.
Let's go back to the very basics and explain that for every court case, there is a deposit underneath the 28 USC 2041, and that they create securities without you knowing it and without you granting permission. So can you explain a little bit more about that, and then why the gap accounting comes in? So can you do it in two parts, the first and the second?
Yeah, let me get a record for everybody here. I'll drop it into the comments. Just give me a second. It's going to be the 1099 A and C instructions from the IRS. A and C. So this is going to blow it out of the water. Here's your proof. Because you're not going to find the proof anywhere else that they're doing this other than they have an administrative agreement with the IRS that authorizes them to do it, okay? Let's see, desktop.
I have, do you want me to, are you having a hard time pulling it up? I have it.
I've got it.
Okay, good.
I just got to see where I put it. Here we go. Okay, so Gavin, if you want to put that up on the monitor for everybody.
Yep.
And believe me, I've been in front of state clerks of the court, federal clerks of the court. They surround me with sheriffs. They surround me with U.S. Marshals. I don't care. I literally look at them and I say, I'm here to make sure that the clerk of the court doesn't go to prison. Here's my documentation and my proof that they're actually doing this, right? So I'm here just to get documentation from you, which is required by law under the Internal Revenue Code. So if you scroll down to page 3. And we're going to go to section, section 5 on page 3. I think we went a little too far. We're on page 5.
Okay, page
down.
sorry. Page 2, page 3. Here we go. Oh man, this thing goes fast.
Page 3. Yep. So number 5C. Oh my gosh, who's filing a 1099-A? A court or court administrative office. So a 1099-A is proof that they have acquired your secured property or that you have abandoned your property. You've abandoned your bond. So the 1099-A also has to be coupled with a CUSIP, right? So that's the tracking number for the bid performance and payment bond that's in the CRIS system, Court Registry Investment System. And so, yes, they have created a bond. There is a CUSIP for it, and they use the 1099-A to extract the credit from your minor account to fund the bond. Okay, so, and there's plenty of stuff in Title 31 with the Treasury Department that says they're authorized to do this. If you really want to hunt for it, I have that too. So yes, they are actually doing it. There's your proof. What else do you need, right? How much more proof do people need that they're concealing and removing the accounting and the securities from the court, which is a violation under 7206, right? 7206 from the Internal Revenue Service. They are removing the accounting and the securities to defraud you as the grantor, bailer, owner, and beneficiary, right? And that is a trust. Securities are held in trust. So when you revoke and revest it and they don't liquidate it, now they're into embezzlement. They're operating as what is called the incidental beneficiary committing defalcation. Okay, that means that they're acting as a beneficiary to that security when you're the beneficiary. Defalcation means that they're embezzling it from you.
So Todd,
These are legal terms that the IRS uses for this process of them embezzling the securities when you've revoked and revested. So Gene Keating had a document, I think it was called Cracking the Code, if I remember right, which he explained the commercial nature of the courts, and he pulled out all the case law, statutes, codes, everything that they were using to operate the court on the commercial side, right? So I do have a memorandum of law for that. I do actually train judges and other attorneys that need training. So I actually handle the bonding and underwriting commercial securities and their liability for what they're doing when they get caught.
He mentioned 2 acronyms. One was CRIS, C-R-I-S. That stands for Court Registry Investment System. And the other was CUSIP, C-U-S-I-P. That stands for Committee on Uniform Security Identification Procedures. It's a registered trademark of the American Bankers Association. This is how our justice system securitizes us. Once your birth certificate document is registered with the state, they issue bonds known as CUSIP bonds in your name. Your name is copyrighted as the corporate asset of the British Territorial United States Government Franchise Corporation. Your name is then applied to a foreign trust corporation, which is subject to United States territorial admiralty law and is obligated and responsible for paying the debts of the foreign United States territorial government. They issue a Social Security number. All of this, of course, done without disclosure to you, to open a master account with 2 separate ledgers, one for debt and one for credit owed to an incorporated municipal corporation franchise operated in your name, in all capital letters. The debt side ledger account number follow the form of a normal Social Security number, such as 555-66-7777, which is a CUSIP bond number, while the credit side shows a 9-digit AUTOCRIS trust account number without the dashes, such as 555-667777. So the Social Security number is used for both a CUSIP and AUTOCRIS account number. AUTOCRIS is the acronym that stands for Automated Tracking Identification System. This is a direct demand account that FDR established for, quote unquote, you without your knowledge or consent, and dubbed it a special trust account that you haven't known about or had access to. This is securities fraud. The two ledgers are kept completely separated and are administered by completely different organizations, so that the two ledgers are deliberately never brought together and balanced. They turned the credit side of the ledger into a giant slush fund, so all the credit owed to Joe, for example, and everyone else was being sequestered or blocked, in the language of the banks, and invested by them for, quote unquote, you. More securities fraud. For every dollar worth of debt posted against the CUSIP accounts held in your names, there's an equal dollar worth of credit posted for the AUTOCRIS accounts also held in your names that are managed by gigantic financial management organizations like Fidelity and PIMCO and Price Waterhouse. Even more securities fraud. I'm going to show you a document that proves their securities fraud activities from the Court Administrative Office, like the judge's son pointed out to us. This PDF is used by the Administrative Office of the United States Courts under the regulatory obligations directed to them by the Internal Revenue Service. It is proof that the plaintiff and the government are the debtors in all these court cases, and the defendant, you and I, are the creditors. It is admitted right here in black and white. This PDF, issued by the district courts, clearly admits that the purpose of these courts is extortion and racketeering under force to pay their debts. Securities fraud at its best. Fact number 12. Our federal government cashes in on undisclosed life insurance claims they have on us when we die. A lot of this evil that I've described here, which are the most venal kinds of crime, has occurred because of three industries that have been allowed to run rapid without due oversight: banking, securities, and insurance. We've talked about banking and securities. Now let's talk about insurance, particularly life insurance. But first, let me be clear. All insurance, life, car, home, medical, disability, all of it is merely legalized gambling. It's a bet that the insurance companies make on a future event, the date and cause of your death. Now regarding life insurance in our federal government, this evil related to insurance schemes is linked back to the 1700s, when people started purchasing bottomry bonds on non-existent ships. In 1702, there was a bottomry bonds scandal, which allowed the Dutch East India Company to insure non-existent ships and cargo and collect on the insurance when these so-called ships were supposedly lost at sea. This same scheme was resurrected and applied to special purpose vehicles on the land. When FDR created special purpose vehicles in our names in the wake of World War II and insured them as property belonging to the British territorial federal government, the Americans were declared lost at sea, just like the phantom ships of the Dutch East India Company, while the actual ships belonging to the Dutch East India Company sailed over the horizon to New York and were reflagged as American ships. The fraud artists back home collected the insurance money either way. This bottomry bonds scandal led to the dissolution of the Dutch East India Company. People don't want to believe that pandemics are planned, war is planned, unnatural disasters like hurricanes, fires, and tornadoes are planned. So-called unexpected events like these were orchestrated to generate revenue from cashing in on lucrative and a massive amount of life insurance policies. I know this sounds too diabolical to conceive that a government would do this to its citizenry. So let me lay it out for you how our federal government runs their life insurance racket. The first scam is to seize upon you and your estate while you are still a hapless baby in your cradle. The liars pretend that you have been abandoned at the hospital and that your mother is a mere informant because she signed your birth certificate. Unbeknownst to her, inadvertently turning you over as a ward to their state-of-state organization. Now that they have a false claim to work from, they take out a life insurance policy on their ward to profit themselves in the event of your death. This guarantees that whatever they may have to spend on you, which is usually nothing thanks to your gullible parents, will be returned with profit upon your demise. Your entire estate then, your name, your body, your assets, and even your rights are all rolled over into an estate trust benefiting yet another level of government, the Roman Municipal United States, Inc. This trust is set up as a generation skipping trust, and your state-of-state guardians obligingly agree on your behalf, of course, for your own good, of course, undisclosed to you, of course, that you agree without ever actually agreeing or even knowing about this crap going on in the background. You agree to donate all your worldly goods and assets to this generation skipping trust and to forego all of it, the benefit for yourself. That's how all your contributions to the IRS become characterized as gift and estate taxes. Now, obviously, when you die, it is payoff time for the government criminals responsible for this system. 30 days after your death certificate is issued, they make a claim on abandonment against your estate and they seize it for their own benefit, of course. They also collect on your life insurance policy. So now you know why war and psyops are so profitable and why they have been constantly perpetuated. Fact number 13. Government services corporations are nothing but a big human trafficking ring, managed by criminals who use average people as their accomplices. Let's come clean here. Corporations aren't real. They are a figment of our imagination. They only exist in our minds and on paper. They are inanimate. They cannot commit any crimes. So let's get real. Evil men and evil women are hiding behind the curtain of the corporate veil, committing these atrocities against you and I. Ignorant men and ignorant women are hiding behind the curtain of the corporate veil, blindly assisting these criminals as their accomplices in these diabolical schemes that I've described to you in this video. Many of you have sensed that something doesn't feel right about this, about how our world is being run. You were all right all along. It's not that the laws don't work. It's that the criminals don't follow the laws. Let's call it what it is. If they did, you wouldn't need tens of thousands of administrative statutes, codes, and ordinances. Let's stop fooling ourselves. Proposing more laws is not the answer. Do you know that it is already lined out under Public Law 10, Chapter 48, 48 Statute 112, formerly known as HJR 192 of June 5th, 1933, of 31 USC 5118 D2, in the Emergency Banking Relief Act of March 9th, 1933, and in the Public Law 73-1, 48 Stat. 1, telling us all that all forms of currency are an individual's credit per public policy 73-10. It isn't actually told to us in those words so the average people could understand. It's hidden in illegalese. Criminals hide the truth. This administrative law means that you own the currencies, lock, stock, and barrel. It also means that all the corporations are in your debt. So your labor and your intellectual assets, your good name, your copyrights, your patents, your trademarks, etc., have all been seized upon by the Brits and sold into indentured servitude to back the Federal Reserve notes and all other forms of currency, including coupons, stamps, tariffs, taxes, promissory notes, money orders, wire transfers, USD, FRNs, traffic citations, court cases, digital currencies. You name it, you are on the hook for it. It's your blood money that they are using to run their fiat currency system and pay their payrolls, while they have conveniently cashiered away your gold and silver resources for safekeeping in the Philippines and in Indonesia and other ports of call, and blocked your access to any alternative form of commodity-backed money. They force you to slave away and bear the brunt, the entire brunt, of supporting their labor-backed currency issues, while blocking your access to your own gold and silver resources. Those resources could have been used to issue a commodity-backed currency instead, as President Kennedy directed, but they killed him and pushed their filthy petrodollar instead and jacked up your energy costs sky high as your reward. Remember the moment in The Wizard of Oz when the Wicked Witch of the West starts melting? Well, we're there. It's time that these corporations running these criminal fraud schemes be liquidated. We have lived in this land of Oz for far too long, 160 years too long. The group of men and women responsible for the existence, operations, care, and maintenance of a corporation also tend to remain somewhat in the shadows, defined only by their offices and functions, like Judy Grant, mayor of Limestone, Bill Baines, police chief of Bradley Township, Stephen Michaels, judge of the 21st Judicial District of Kankakee County. It's time we start taking names. They are receiving the kickbacks in the form of taxes, fines, fees, bonds, stock dividends, pensions, and their government paychecks. They are already bought off. From the standpoint of those responsible, if the corporation goes bankrupt, only the corporation's assets are at risk. The shareholders take the loss. The bankruptcy court tidies things up, but the employees, directors, and the officers of the corporations are unharmed and left unaccountable by the corporate veil, the fact that a corporation doesn't really exist. The harm in all this is that we've forgotten what's real. We've forgotten Kansas. It's time we click our silver slippers and get back home to reality and leave all of this corporate criminality behind us. In this episode, I have laid it all out for you. You see how convoluted that was? I broadly covered the grim financial landscape of this world we have created for ourselves. People don't want to believe you when you make even one of these claims about our federal government. They look at you like you have two heads. Now bombard them with all 13 reasons all at once that support your claims. I hope this motivates you to take a stand and stop putting up with this criminality. I hope you are outraged enough to dive deeper and educate yourself more and discover that it's really living men and women who are evil, diabolical criminals running our world, not corporations. Realize they just don't exist. These criminals are just hiding behind the corporate veil. There is no way around this. The unlawful corporations must be dismantled and their criminal operators arrested, assets stripped away from them, and barred from ever doing business again, anywhere. We must show zero tolerance for any form of peonage and slavery if our world is to be transformed into the paradise we really want to live in. Tell me what you think. Leave your comments and questions below, and stay tuned for our next episode of Part 2 of the Resurgence Pulse Report. See you next time.